Hello and welcome back. Before I begin, I'd like to give a big thank you to my newest subscribers, Cartoony0000, Chrysalis Stage, The Frantic 81, 91 Arpitha, Joan Walking, and Wander the Night. Thank you all so much for subscribing, I really appreciate it. And now, on with the haul. Once again, this is going to be a haul from the Book Thing of Baltimore, a wonderful nonprofit that gives out free books every weekend and accepts donations of unwanted books, and you can find out more about them at www.bookthing.org. First up, I was so excited to find this because you may not be aware of this, but there is a wonderful series of books out there called the Loeb Classical Library, and they feature all the greats of classical Greek and Latin literature in bilingual editions. So you have the original Greek or Latin on one page and then the English translation on the facing page. And they are these gorgeous little tiny hardbacks, one of which I'm about to show you. And I love classical literature, and one of my dreams is someday to be able to have the complete Loeb Classical Library, which is, I think it's something like $12,000 and it's a ton of books. So that may not happen anytime soon, but someday. And in the meantime, I picked up the volume 22 of Aristotle, which is his Rhetoric. And this one doesn't have a dust jacket. Obviously the new ones have dust jackets. They're bright green for the Greek and bright red for the Latin. And this was pretty rare because I have only very, very occasionally found Loeb Classical Library at the Book Thing. I found two random volumes of Dio's Roman History. It was like volume 6 and volume 7 or something, and one volume of Hippocrates once. So this is only the fourth one I found there. Really excited to have it. And then I got Montcalm and Wolfe by Francis Parkman. Parkman is one of the great American historians, very early American historian. His best known book is probably The Oregon Trail. And he's also known for The Conspiracy of Pontiac, and I'm looking forward to reading this one. And I wound up getting a fair amount of science fiction and fantasy this time around. Usually the science fiction section is pretty picked over, but this time it wasn't. And I got Rumors of Spring by Richard Grant. I had actually never heard of this before, but it sounded interesting, and it's published by Bantam Spectra, which is one of the best science fiction fantasy imprints out there. A bit less so in recent years. They seem to have really gone into like the Star Wars franchise, or the Star Wars novelizations, which, you know, if you like that kind of thing, there's nothing wrong with it, but just not really my scene. But back in the day, they used to publish really, really cutting edge and interesting and literary genre fiction. And then, speaking of interesting, I got this Vampire, or Vampire, I'm not sure, by Brian Lumley. This is volume 2 in the Necroscope series, which is a series about vampire hunters. And I've actually never read anything of his before. I have Necroscope sitting around here somewhere, which has an equally disgusting cover, a skull with a tongue hanging out of it. But he's supposed to be one of the greats in the horror genre. And then I was so excited to find this. This is 8 Skilled Gentlemen by Barry Hugard. It was just really serendipitous that I found this because in the bookstore where I'm working now, the Ivy Bookshop, I'm working on a big overhaul of our science fiction fantasy section because it had really been allowed to languish. And I was just thinking of interesting authors, and one of the ones I was thinking of was Barry Hugard. And I had come across his work when I was working at the Pratt Library downtown, and I was shelf reading in the fiction stacks, which basically means you just make sure the books are in order. And I had just come across his work. He writes a fantasy set in ancient China. It's like sort of an alternate ancient China. And I've never read any of his books, but they just sounded kind of neat. And unfortunately, this is the third one out of 3 in the series, but they sound like they pretty much stand alone. So I'm really eager to give this a try. And I'm not even sure if they're still in print, so I'm not sure if I can order them for the store, but I hope I can. And then I got The Lives and Times of Jerry Cornelius, Stories of the Comic Apocalypse by Michael Moorcock. I really loved Moorcock's, I loved it so much I'm forgetting the name, An Alien Heat, which was the first volume in his Dancers at the End of Time series. That's actually the only one of his books I've read, but I really, really liked it, and I'm looking forward to reading this one about Jerry Cornelius, who's one of his recurring characters. And A Trip to the Book thing really would not be complete without another Fay Weldon book. This is Moon Over Minneapolis, which is a collection of short stories. And someday I will have every Fay Weldon book. I still don't have them all. I know it seems like every time I do a video I have another Fay Weldon book, but I still have several left to collect. And one of my all-time favorite imprints, and I've said this before, I know I must sound really shallow talking about imprints all the time, but sometimes just an imprint really can be a predictor of quality. Sometimes it's not, but sometimes it is. And one of my favorite imprints is Plume Contemporary Fiction from like the mid to late 80s through maybe the mid 90s or so. After the mid 90s, it started getting a little bit trashy. But really, if it has the little plume symbol on it from say like 85 to 95, it's going to be really good. So I found a couple of those. This is Helmet of Flesh by Scott Simons and Adrenaline by James Dillinger. And just so you can be aware, this is the little plume symbol up here. Look for it. And then I got The Clever Woman of the Family by Charlotte M. Young. Young is a really well-known, or not really well-known maybe nowadays, but she was a really popular novelist of her day. And I think probably her most famous novel was The Heir of Redcliffe, which I believe was name-checked in Little Women. I think that's how I heard of it. But I've never read anything by her before, and this one sounds pretty interesting. It's about a woman who goes to be a missionary in India and basically finds herself in way over her head. And this is from the Virago, is this Virago? Yeah, Virago Modern Classics imprint, which is another really interesting publisher, although kind of uneven, because they specialize in works by women, especially lost or forgotten works, but not necessarily. I mean, Young is pretty famous. But sometimes it's kind of like, okay, they were just digging up anything a woman ever wrote, and it's not necessarily the most interesting thing in the world, but they've also published a lot of really great books. So, looking forward to this one. And then I got Walking the Dog by Walter Mosley. This is unfortunately a poor forlorn jacketless copy. This is number 2 in the Socrates Fortlow series. I think I've talked about this before when I picked up The Right Mistake a while ago. But the first one in the series is Always Outnumbered, Always Outgunned, and I've seen the film, have not read the book, but really want to. So I now own the 2nd and 3rd in the series, and I'm hoping number 1 will show up. I mean, I suppose I could read them out of order, but who wants to do that? And last but not least, I got Clive Barker's Imagica. I would consider myself a Clive Barker fan. I've so far only read The Great and Secret Show, The Inhuman Condition, and The Books of Blood, the first 3 volumes. And The Inhuman Condition, I hate it. That was actually the first one of his I read. It was a collection of stories, and I really just didn't like it. Especially he referred to the biblical book of Revelation as Revelations throughout this one story, and it was like, if you're going to be referring to it that often, you should probably use the proper name. But so that was just a minor annoyance. But I liked The Great and Secret Show. I felt like it maybe went on a tad much, but overall I enjoyed it. And The Books of Blood, by the 3rd volume, I felt like he was kind of rehashing himself over and over again, but there are some really good stories in there, like Midnight Meat Train and Jacqueline S. So I'm looking forward to giving this one a try, although it is a pretty serious time commitment, as you can see. And if you've made it this far, thanks for watching, and I hope you'll join me for my next video.